for prayers. They marched on north, the elf blood froze. The peppermint fields now lined with woes.
We're laughing aloud now, magic in the air. Wands roll around us, cast away our care. Friends in the hallways, adventures we find. Spells and enchantments, trouble on our mind. That's so wizards, oh, 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 oh. Life is a spell we know. We're casting joy and glow, oh, oh. That's a wizard show.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to you today not to praise Dungeons and Dragons, but to bury it, or something like that. Hail Caesar. It's 8 o'clock on the dot. It is Tuesday, the 16th day of December, here at Site B, located in the Christmas heartland that is Fresno, Nevada, a town that does not, in fact, exist. So, yeah, we're doing this again. Yeah, again, okay, so I don't even really, I'm exhausted, really. There's something new, please, could we please just have something new? So this is coming to us from Professor Dungeon Master. Death seems to be on his mind lately. Of course, he is dealing with cancer, so maybe subconsciously. We've done the death of VTubers, or Dungeon Tubers, or whatever you want to call it. So now we're doing the death of D&D. But really, he's not talking about the death of D&D in this. He's talking about the fact that there are possibilities out there besides D&D, and he is giving a very loving shout out to many of the independent games that he appreciates. But independent games are the future, and here's me talking about them for 20 minutes is not going to sell. D&D is dead. Here's a bunch of independent games that I really, really like. I want to talk about for 20 minutes. That's going to sell, and that's going to get him clicks. So I understand why he did this. He understands the thumbnail game. He understands the clickbait game. He has got, 150K subscribers and 5.2 people thumbed up this. I've got like not even 3,000 subscribers. So we have to bow our heads to the cleverness genius that is Professor Dungeon Master. Just love this guy, love everything he does. Every time he gets up out of bed, dresses up, puts on a show, it's like, dude, I wish I was this cool. He's in my top 5 people that I respect in the hobby. Of course, I can only count to 5, so all of you are in my top 5 people that I respect in the hobby. Which, of course, begs the question, is Dungeons and Dragons dead? Well, let's go deeper. What is Dungeons and Dragons? Why is my voice like this? I sound like Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know. What is D&D? Where is D&D? Why is D&D? Who is D&D? Who owns D&D? And can D&D die? Is Dungeons and Dragons a word? Yes. Dungeons and Dragons is a registered trademark, copyright, locked in a vault in the bottom of an ocean, protected by sharks, that Hasbro owns. And Hasbro is not going to let that word go as long as they can milk it for every single solitary cent. So all the people thinking that, Wizards of the Coast is going to sell D&D, Elon Musk is going to buy D&D, Wizards of the Coast is killing D&D. No, because Hasbro owns that. It's theirs. They're never going to let it go. Stop it. Maybe 20 years from now, if it stops making them any money at all, but no. So Dungeons and Dragons, the word owned by Hasbro, is not dead. Unless Hasbro releases the trademark, copyright, fails to renew it, whatever, which I 0.00001% chance of ever happening in my lifetime. Not saying it's not going to happen, but more likely they will do with Dungeons and Dragons the same thing they've done with Transformers, G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, and every other IP they own that isn't making them as much money as they'd like. They'll put it on the shelf until they find a moment to milk it again. But no, the word is theirs. They're going to own the word forever. Let's just put that aside. So the word is not dead. The idea of Dungeons and Dragons, the branding of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, the meat snacks. Dungeons and Dragons, the breakfast cereal. Dungeons and Dragons toys, Dungeons and Dragons games, anything that Hasbro can put that Dungeons and Dragons name on and say, yes, that's Dungeons and Dragons. If we go all the way back to one of my very first videos back at Site A, where it showed me eating a sandwich, and I said, Hasbro can call anything Dungeons and Dragons, and it becomes Dungeons and Dragons. Look, this sandwich is Dungeons and Dragons, because Hasbro can brand that to anything. So as long as Hasbro, which goes back to the first one, as long as Hasbro can brand the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, it's not dead. It's not going anywhere. They will continue to find ways to make money off of the idea of D&D, an idea they own. So, nope, put that away. Moving on. Dungeons and Dragons Gygaxian level-based D20 fantasy that currently is owned by Wizards of the Coast. Well, they don't own it because the Supreme Court says you can't own a game. And they've thrown the basic building blocks out into the wild with the OGL way back in the Stone Age. And once it went out of the air, they can't put it back no matter how hard they try. So the Gygaxian D20 level-based fantasy idea that we apply the name Dungeons and Dragons to, is that dead? Can it die? Wizards of the Coast can choose to stop printing it. That is absolutely 100% highly likely. Wizards of the Coast can hand off the rule set to someone else. Hasbro can close Wizards of the Coast because they don't need it. But is so in that sense, it could die. In the sense that Hasbro could sell it off, give it to somebody else, just stop printing it. Say, here, Professor Dungeon Master, here, Critical Role, here, whoever. We don't want to do the level-based D20 Gygaxian fantasy anymore. You do it. Sure, that could happen. In fact, a lot of us are thinking it's going to happen sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. Plus with the announcement of D&D 2027, well, the rumors of D&D 2027 happening, a rumor that's been floating around since 2020, which I've been telling you about for the past 6 years. Yeah, they can stop printing it. They don't need it. They have said that repeatedly. They don't need level-based Gygaxian fantasy. They don't think level-based Gygaxian fantasy makes them money. So discontinuing it is perfectly fine. They've said that. So they could hand it to somebody else. They could sell the name D&D to somebody else. And then just arrange a deal where they still make the most possible money off of the name. But I don't see them selling the name ever because they're going to, until they can stop milking it. I do see them renting the name out. I do see them saying, hey, you do the rules. We don't want to anymore. It's too much trouble. We don't need Wizards of the Coast. It's basically just bleeding money at this point in time. So here, company, take the rules. Do whatever you want. Call them D&D. We don't care. The name is ours. We're going to get our percentage of the money off of the name. But the rules, well, those are anybody's. D20 level-based Gygaxian fantasy, that's anybody's. Nobody owns that anymore because you can't own a game, and Wizards of the Coast threw that out into the wild, and they can't get it back. And as we can just see, there are a lot of level-based D20 Gygaxian fantasies out there. And there have been since day one. I mean, almost since the very first Dungeons and Dragons hit the shelves, people were making retro clones. People were making their take on it, you know. So the OGL technically existed before the OGL because I remember, you know, almost within the first year of me having D&D, knockoff D&D and other D20 fantasy games. So D20 Gygaxian fantasy is out there in the wild. It will never, ever go away. It's too ingrained in the gestalt of game design. There are other D20 games that use the same stat block. That stat block is technically part of the original rules, which Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro holds the name to. So again, yeah, it's not dead. Is it not making as much money as it was, say, a year ago or 5 years ago? And are independent games like Shadow Dark, like Castles and Crusades, like Dolemwood, like the many of the games that Professor DM talks about in his video, going to ever replace it, going to ever make more money in it, going to ever become more important to the gestalt than the idea? And who owns it? And it all cycles back, blah, 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 to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, okay? To the idea of level-based Gygaxian fantasy. And can Hasbro continue to find ways to make money off level-based Gygaxian fantasy and the idea of Dungeons and Dragons? And can other people use it? And will anybody ever be able to compete with it? Because, I mean, Brandon Sanderson's game that pulled in what, like 9 million, 10 million, 13 million? Kelsey made 3 million off of the last Kickstarter she did. DC20 is making Dungeon Coach a lot of money. Draw Steel, it was like a $3 million. There's a lot of big money Kickstarters out there. Is that 2, 3, 9, 13 million ever going to come close to the $1 billion Hasbro claims Wizards of the Coast made this year? No, well, I mean, we know that's a whole separate topic of what the $1 billion came from. But Wizards of the Coast, quote unquote, made a lot of money this year. Is anybody ever going to come close to that? Brandon Sanderson, maybe. I mean, if the $13 million, I don't know how well the game's selling. Oh, wait, yeah, I do. It's really, really low, really low on the sales there. Right now, number 1 is Warhammer. Congratulations. This is just one. This is just drive-through, obviously. So this is no way to judge. Daggerheart's number 10 on drive-through right now. Ashes Without Numbers is number 24. Oh, there it is. Number 29. Number 29 on the top sellers on drive-through. I don't know about other channels or physical. Why is it 29? Probably because it's like 10,000 pages. Is it a good game? Doesn't matter. Or is there anything out there that is as good or better than Gygaxian D20 Fantasy? Yes, there are tons of games out there that are better than Gygaxian D20 Fantasy. Will any of those games ever make more money than the idea of Dungeons and Dragons has made Wizards of the Coast over the past 50 years, slash this year alone? And is Wizards of the Coast making as much money off of this year as it did in the previous year? And where will it go in the future? Can we kill D&D? And who owns that idea? Because again, Supreme Court, OGL, legality, blah, 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 blah. So despite the best or worst wishes of others, D&D is not dead. It cannot die because it's an idea. It's an idea that is out there in the atmosphere, and once that idea was let out of the bottle, you can't put it back in the bottle. Is Wizards of the Coast going to continue to make the same amount of money that it made off of D&D last year, / between 2017 and 2023? Absolutely not. There's no way, shape, and form. We would have to have another pandemic, first and foremost. Then we would have to have another shot in the cultural zeitgeist that is equal to or greater than Critical Role and Stranger Things. And then there's a lot of other little things that would have had to happen in order for ever that little golden bubble of 2017 to 2023 to ever happen again. I'm not saying it won't happen, but at this point in time, it's highly unlikely that that series of events could ever be repeated. Will we have another pandemic? Not my place to say. Will there ever be another Critical Role Stranger Things? Doubtful, but not my place to say. Will any of the other things that happened in that time period happen again in order for us to reach that golden bubble? Doubtful, but who's to say? It's not to say that a scenario that equal might happen in the future. But yeah, again, so there's so many factors in that math that we can't even count it anymore. So the golden parachute, the big money making of D&D that had the last 10 years, that's dead. The rule set, that's not dead. That is alive and well, and you can use it. I can use it. Anybody can use it. Hasbro makes their 10% or whatever. So yeah, will anybody else ever be able to pick up the ball and run with the ball? Plenty of people are doing it already. Castles and Crusades is probably your best D20 Gygaxian fantasy level-based evolution. It's definitely more Gygaxian fantasy than the current D&D, which is fine. Shadowrun, my game, whatever. You could write a game that's 100 times better than Castles and Crusades. I don't know. So it was always, well, the idea of Gygaxian level-based fantasy will always be out there in one form or another. And there will always be people finding new ways to tell the story of level-based fantasy, D20 fantasy, or just fantasy, just telling the story of fantasy. Because we can argue that Dungeons and Dragons 2024 is no longer Gygaxian level-based fantasy. It's level-based fantasy superheroes. It has very little connection to what Gygax originally wrote, but that's okay because other people are doing the Gygax story perfectly fine. And D&D doesn't need Gygax, doesn't need that anymore because it's its own thing now. Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast D20 is its own thing that is constantly evolving and changing. Some of you, a lot of you don't like the changes. Rules-wise, I don't care. Philosophy-wise and the Wizards of the Coast current political stance, that's just dumb. And that is permanently just screwing themselves over. And I seriously doubt they'll ever recover from the damage that they've done to themselves. So, blah. And then this, of course, this cycles back to, is dungeon tubing dead? Is D&D dead? Are independent games the future? There's always been independent games. There always will be independent games. There will always be somebody saying D&D is dead. There will always be the Scott Garabys and all the other people out there saying that D&D is fine. I am sure I will repeat this video again sometime in the next 6 to 12 months where I will be addressing somebody else saying D&D is dead, because it's a great way to make money and draw attention. But really, in Professor Dungeon Master's defense, because I love the guy and I appreciate everything he does, and I'm not trying to rub salt in his wounds, really what he did was just shout out some independent games. So just ignore the title of the video and watch the video. It's linked down below, and just appreciate him shouting out and pointing your attention to a lot of new games that are out there that are as good, or if not better, than the 2024 level-based D20 fantasy that Wizards of the Coast creates. Is 2024 Wizards of the Coast D20 fantasy Dungeons and Dragons? Yes, because it's their name and they can call whatever they want Dungeons and Dragons. They could put the name on this, that's the thing in my hand, and it would become Dungeons and Dragons Coffee. So yes, it is absolutely 100% Dungeons and Dragons, the product that Wizards of the Coast put out this year and put out in 2025 and put out in 2014, and whatever they're going to do in 2027, that is D&D. And until Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro decides to let that name go, anything they put that on, because it's D&D, is D20 level-based fantasy dead? No, absolutely not, because people will keep making it. Is Gygaxian level-based D20 fantasy dead? No, absolutely not, because the idea is out there and people will continue to try and recreate Gary's masterpiece, whether it's Osric, Castles and Crusades, or some little teeny independent company that we haven't heard of yet that is just charging away, whether it's Basic Experts little white box thing. The idea of Gygaxian fantasy is out there. The idea of D20 fantasy is out there. The idea of fantasy is out there. D&D is a name. And that name is ingrained in our pop culture subconscious. So for the foreseeable future, that name will always be attached to the idea, and that idea will always be attached to a certain, I don't want to say the word zeitgeist again. I don't even know if I'm using the word right, but yeah. So that can't die. It would be impossible for it to die. It might fade. It might be not as popular as it was. It might not make as much money as it did. It might go back to just 2 or 3 different people scattered across the planet, sitting at a table, rolling dice and telling silly stories about goblins with sticks, which is fine. Will independent games get bigger and better and more money? Yes, absolutely, until the bubble breaks, because will we ever see another $13 million Kickstarter? Nobody has money. It's a recession. We're all struggling just to keep a roof over our head. That kind of money doesn't exist for a game that's now number 30 on the bestseller list. People bought it because of the name Brandon Sanderson, because the people like the series. I don't ever foresee a moment in time where D&D will not be the first game you see on the shelf on a store that's still carrying it. I don't ever see a time where we won't associate the idea with the name, and we won't associate the name with an idea. Those two are just so ingrained in the past 50 years worldwide pop culture that no matter what game we're playing tomorrow, it's D&D. Star Wars, D6, D&D. Percentile base, it's D&D. It's all D&D. It all came from D&D. D&D was first. Or Teslanta was first, or Empire of the Petal Throne was first, depending upon who you think of, but or Bronstein was first. But the idea was out there. The idea existed before Gygax. All Gygax did was put a name to it. And it has been hypothetically proven that something like D&D would have come into existence anyways, even if Gygax and Anderson and those guys never happened. It was just inevitable that a role-playing game would have come into existence, even if D20 level-based Gygaxian fantasy never happened. It's going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to make money. It's going to lose money. It's going to be popular. It's not going to be popular. People will be arguing over this for centuries, long after I am dead and in the ground, because that's what we do. That said, take a look at those games that Professor Dungeon Master shouted out. Go to Drive-Thru and take a look at all the wonderful games that they're talking about that are out there that aren't D&D. Take a chance. Take a chance on me. Take a chance and pick some game that's on sale for free. Mark down to pay what you want. I don't know. Find something out there that appeals to you. Accept the fact that there are other games besides Dungeons and Dragons. There are games that are as good or better than Wizards of the Coast D20 Fantasy. There are an infinite number of ways to tell the story you want to tell at your table, as long as you can find a couple people who can take time out of their life for 3 hours once a month to sit at a table, roll dice, go on wacky adventures, and play goblins with sticks. You're playing, you're role-playing, you're doing what Gary Gygax wanted. Gary Gygax didn't care about the money. Yes, he did. He didn't care about the name. Yes, he did. He didn't care if you followed the rules he wrote or not. That's absolutely true. He just wanted you to play. He just wanted a bunch of people sitting around the table telling silly stories about goblins with sticks. And as long as there is somebody out there somewhere in some form sitting around a table telling silly stories about goblins with sticks, D&D cannot die. The idea of tabletop role-playing cannot die. Yeah, that's it. Happy holidays. I'll see y'all later. Get off my land.